In December 2005, Sean Connery attended the 18th European Film Academy Awards in Berlin, Germany. Connery was 75 years old. On this occasion, the director of one of Connery's best films would be presenting him with the EFA's Lifetime Achievement Award.
And here to present this award is the French director with whom he made In the Name of the Rose. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jean-Jacques Annaud.
Bonsoir, bonsoir. Quel plaisir, quelle joie, mon cher Claude.
The director was Jean-Jacques Annaud, and the movie was The Name of the Rose. The Name of the Rose is one of my all-time favorite movies. Adapted from the best-selling novel by Umberto Eco, it captivated audiences worldwide with its murder mystery story set during the Middle Ages. It is a suspenseful, sexy, sad, and sensational film, and among its many gifts, it gave Sean Connery what I consider to be the greatest performance of his career. I've been obsessed with The Name of the Rose ever since I discovered it while growing up as a teenager in the 2000s. I've seen it countless times, and it has had a tremendous influence on my own career as a director. So, in February 2020, shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic forced the whole world into lockdown mode, I met with Jean-Jacques Annaud for coffee in the lobby of the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills, and I asked him everything that I wanted to know about the film. His answers gave me a great starting point, and convinced me that there was potential to tell the story of the film's production in a new format. So to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the theatrical release of The Name of the Rose, I decided to reach out to as many of the film's surviving cast and crew as I could find. You'll hear from the memories of screenwriters Andrew Birkin and Howard Franklin, actors Elya Baskin and Urs Althaus, former Fox president Lawrence Gordon, and actor Ron Perlman.
Where are you right now, Alex?
It's Adam, not Alex. But yeah,
that's okay. I'm just gonna call you. I'm just gonna call you fucking Alex. Okay. So.
You'll also hear from the memories of assistant director Stefano Eco, line producer Gerald Morin, former Fox executive Robert W. Cort, Academy Award-winning costume designer Gabriella Pescucci, casting director Mary Jo Slater, executive producer Thomas Schühly, production manager Franco Coduti. Plus, you'll hear the perspectives of Katja Eichinger, the wife of the film's late producer Bernd Eichinger. You'll hear as much as I was able to find out about what it took to bring The Name of the Rose to the big screen.
You didn't start writing or think of yourself as a writer until what? You sat down to write The Name of the Rose?
Until the age of 48, I considered myself a scholar, and I didn't think of myself as a possible novelist.
Born in the town of Alessandria in northwest Italy on January 5, 1932, Umberto Eco's love of literature began in his childhood, where he became a fan of Jules Verne, Marco Polo, Charles Darwin, and DC comic books about Superman. Growing up, Eco never forgot an experience that he had at age 16 in the late 1940s when he had visited the Benedictine monastery Santa Scholastica in Subiaco, Italy, where he had walked into a dark library and was thrilled by the ancient illustration of the Acta Centorum. According to journalist Jonathan Candle, while Eco was studying at the University of Turin, he wrote his doctoral thesis on St. Thomas Aquinas. Flash forward a couple decades later. In early 1978, Eco was in his mid-40s, totally fulfilled in his chosen career path as a philosopher, when a friend, who worked for a publishing company, approached Eco about the possibility of Eco writing a short detective story for the company. Eco replied that he was not interested in creative writing, and that if he were to ever write a story, it would be at least 500 pages long. Eco's friend told him that she wasn't fishing for that kind of project, but after the meeting ended, Eco returned home and found a notebook that he'd written himself a few years earlier, in which he had written down a list of monks in an unspecified monastery, and in which, in his own words, he had become prodded by a seminal idea. I felt like poisoning a monk. And in March of 1978, Eco began writing a new book about the subject, and the book would take him 2 years to write. When Eco finished work on the manuscript, Valentino Bompiani was interested in publishing it. The book did not have a title yet. According to Jean-Jacques Annaud, Eco's first proposed title was The Abbey, but Bompiani rejected it. Eco's second proposed title was The Library, but Bompiani rejected this title too. Finally, Eco proposed that the book's title be The Name of the Rose. The publisher asked, "What does it mean?" To which Eco replied, "Fuck you." In 1980, The Name of the Rose was finally published. It received mixed reviews from the critics, but it was a big success with the public, selling millions of copies.
At first, it wasn't expected to be the success it was. So at first, it was just a very normal thing. It was fun because my father had never written a novel, and then slowly started having these big numbers, and he was always on the road for promotion and things like that. So it became something exceptional, but within the things that he's always dealt with the Middle Ages. The fact that it was a novel was not outrageous or strange for us, at least.
Eco's book spends a large amount of time on the extended clerical discussions between the monks. The climactic scenes of the book are kind of bleak. The venerable Jorge is unmasked as the killer, but he succeeds in destroying Aristotle's hidden book. Guy leaves the abbey scot-free and takes the girl away with him as his prisoner, where she'll presumably be sent off somewhere to be executed. We never find out what becomes of the girl. After the book's publication, the first movie director who suggested making a film out of the book was the Italian director Marco Ferreri, who told Eco, "Your book seems conceived expressly for a movie script, since the dialogues are just the right length." After giving Ferreri's statement some thought, Eco agreed, believing that the layout of his fictional world would dictate how long it would take for characters to go from one place to another, conversing as they went. This would seem to confirm that Eco wanted a film version of The Name of the Rose to be just as wordy as his book. But as the old saying in filmmaking goes, cinema is more about showing than it is about telling. And little did Eco know that another director from a different European country would soon express his own interest in adapting The Name of the Rose into a film, not necessarily because of the book's dialogue, but for its visual and thematic elements, which spoke to him for deep personal reasons, dating all the way back to his childhood.
When I made The Name of the Rose, book by Umberto Eco, I became very, very familiar with Umberto's theories, and he always says what is important in the book is not what the writer writes, but what the reader reads.
Born in France in 1943, Jean-Jacques Annaud became a filmmaker at an early age. He got his first still camera when he was 7 years old, and he took it to places where people prayed. Temples made Annaud emotional. They still do. As a young man, Annaud had studied medical history at Sorbonne, where his education had included 8 years of ancient Greek study. His favorite writer was Aristotle. Annaud began his professional filmmaking career as a director of French television commercials. In an interview with William Wolfe for New York Magazine, Annaud recalled, "I did 500 commercials and found it hard to escape. I hated the work, but they kept offering me so much money." When Annaud switched to directing feature films, his fortunes changed immediately. Annaud's first feature film, Black and White in Color, was shot in Africa on a budget of $1 million, and it went on to win Annaud the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film.
And the winner is the Ivory Coast for black and white in color.
I believe it is a tribute to the Academy that it has chosen black and white in color, directed by Jean-Jacques Annaud, a man who had never directed a feature film before.
Annaud's second feature film, Coup d'etat, was a spoof of prejudice and hypocrisy in a small French town. For his third feature film, Annaud teamed up with French screenwriter Gerald Morin, best known for his screenwriting work for Roman Polanski on the films Repulsion, Cul-de-sac, The Fearless Vampire Killers, and Tess. Annaud and Morin were both interested in making a film about prehistoric man. The resulting film, Quest for Fire, was made on a budget of $12 million and filmed in such countries as Scotland and Canada. Quest for Fire was released by 20th Century Fox to modest commercial success. According to Box Office Mojo, the film grossed $20 million domestically. Playing the lead roles in Quest for Fire were the up-and-coming actors Everett McGill, Ray Don Chong, and an unknown stage actor named Ron Perlman.
It's important. Jean-Jacques goes to great lengths, and this is the thing I learned by working with him on Quest for Fire, which, I first heard it was a caveman movie, and I had zero regard for it. And then little by little, I began to do research on Jean-Jacques and found out that he was going to get Anthony Burgess to create a language for it. He was going to get Desmond Morris, who was the preeminent anthropologist of the day, to create a whole hierarchy of movement and mores. And it was so rewarding to find the humanity in something that essentially was that abstract, and especially for it to be my first film, and especially for it to be under the tutelage of someone of letters like Jean-Jacques Annaud, one of the most brilliant, most well-read, most articulate, most curious humans I've ever met.
After the success of Quest for Fire, Jean-Jacques Annaud was asked what his next film would be. Annaud perceptively replied, "Whatever I do will probably take another 4 years, because I know it won't be an easy film. I don't like easy films." Initially, Annaud had planned to follow up Quest for Fire with a movie about an animal, and Gerald Morin had written a script entitled The Bear for Annaud to direct. However, because Quest for Fire had been about primitive humans, Annaud worried that if he followed it up with an animal movie, then the film industry might pigeonhole him as a director of creature flicks, so he decided to have The Bear shelved as a potential future project. During a visit to the Caribbean, Annaud was promoting Quest for Fire when he read a French article about a new book that was causing interest in Italy, a thriller set in the 14th century about a search for a lost book, written in Greek by Aristotle. Thinking back to his childhood fascination with churches, temples, and ancient European history, Annaud immediately became interested in reading The Name of the Rose, and he told his screenwriting partner, Alain Godard, to call the book's publishing company over in France. When Annaud returned home, the publishing company had sent him one of the first copies of The Name of the Rose to have been printed. Annaud began reading. By page 100, he wondered, who's the author of this book? And he kept on reading. But by the time he got to page 200, the film rights had already been sold to someone else. And by the time he got to page 500, it had been sold to an Italian television studio, identified by journalist Andrew Pulver as RAI, Radio Televisione Italiana, for whom Umberto Eco had worked on the 1981 series A Grande Richiesta. Jean-Jacques Annaud demanded a meeting with RAI's boss, who stated that their planned television adaptation of The Name of the Rose already had a director assigned. The executive wouldn't reveal who the director was going to be, to which Annaud responded, "It's me." A meeting was then set up in France between Annaud and Umberto Eco, and Annaud went to pick the author up. The next morning, Annaud heard footsteps, saw a shadow in the form of Sherlock Holmes, and realized that it was Eco dressed as Sherlock Holmes. Annaud told Eco that he believed Eco had written The Name of the Rose for him, and he explained the reasons why. He asked Eco what he believed the Franciscans may have been like as slaves. When Eco answered that he didn't know, Annaud responded that he did know. Not only that, but Annaud also told Eco what color pigs were during that era, and he asked Eco if he knew whether monks had beards or not. Annaud's knowledge about such historic details made an impression on Eco.
I remember we went to see together the La Guerre du Feu and Black and White in Color, especially. We joked that, it's a movie from a book where people talk incessantly and it's only monks, and there is a director who has only directed animals and people who grunt. Okay, that could work. One November, Jean-Jacques came to see us in our country house. My first memory was Jean-Jacques arriving with a terrine of foie gras, and my father having won a prize with a giant truffle. And then they left to scout for locations, and me and my friend, we ate the truffles and the foie gras. That's when the relationship between the two became a bit more a working relationship, because obviously Jean-Jacques is a very special person and a very well-read man, and so they made contact, even though my father continued to be a bit skeptical about the idea of making a film out of it. And his approach was, it's his film, it's not mine, I'm not going to get involved in the writing or in anything. They found this formula to describe it as a palimpsest on The Name of the Rose. The palimpsests were basically parchment manuscripts where they would scratch out the ink to rewrite, because paper was so scarce before they invented paper, that is, parchment.
At first, Annaud sought help from his fellow colleagues in France, and he persuaded fellow French producer Gerald Morin to buy the film rights to Name of the Rose. However, Morin didn't think that Annaud had what it took to develop the project. Morin allegedly wanted Jean-Paul Belmondo to star in the film. But meanwhile, over in another European country, a younger film producer was also setting his sights on The Name of the Rose.
And I knew when I read it then, mid-80s, that's my movie. That's the book I want to make a film out of. You know, I'm not, let's say, a guy who is easily to inflame. But I knew when I read that book, that's my movie.
Born in Germany in 1949, Bernd Eichinger had attended film school in Munich. He had studied semiotics and structuralism, so he was already familiar with Umberto Eco's work in the field of philosophy. Like Eco, Eichinger was also a fan of comic books, although whereas Eco was a DC guy, Eichinger was a Marvel guy. One of his idols was Stan Lee, and his favorite superhero was the Silver Surfer. At age 29, Eichinger had taken over the distribution company Constantine Film, with the goal of revolutionizing cinema in Germany by making films that could be entertaining while also offering cultural and artistic value. At the beginning of his career, Eichinger had produced Christiane F., at that time the most successful German-language film across Europe since the end of World War II. Then, in the mid-1980s, Eichinger entered the fray of the mainstream by producing Wolfgang Petersen's The Never-Ending Story. Adapted from the book by Michael Ende, The Never-Ending Story was extremely difficult to finance and allegedly became one of the most expensive films ever made in Europe at that time. The making of the film would prove to be a rough experience in many ways. Eichinger's own concept of breaking the fourth wall for the film's climax infuriated Michael Ende so much that Ende went so far as to file an unsuccessful injunction to try to stop the film from getting made. Wolfgang Petersen insisted that child actor Noah Hathaway do his own stunts, and during production, Hathaway got seriously hurt on more than one occasion. Decades later, as an adult, Hathaway would complain in a Galactica TV interview about the circumstances of The Never-Ending Story's production. Somehow, the cast and crew persevered in face of such tensions, and the film's enduring central theme about the power of books and the importance of the human imagination was close to Bernd Eichinger's heart. Around this time, Eichinger had also inquired about the film rights to The Name of the Rose, and he contacted the book's German publisher, Roman Hanser, only to be told that Gerard Lebovici already owned the film rights.
he called him, and Michael Krüger said, like, no way. I mean, you really need to get, you're way too late. I mean, the rights are already gone.
Then, in 1984, tragedy struck when Gerard Lebovici was murdered in a parking lot.
I mean, there are different theories about his murder. One is that it was a mafia killing. The other one was that it was a left-wing extremist killing, or, you know, he was a supporter of the Situationists, and maybe the Situationists killed him.
Jean-Jacques Annaud recalls that when he first heard the news, he initially misunderstood and thought that it was his friend Gerard Brock who had been murdered. To this day, Gerard Lebovici's murder has never been solved. After Lebovici's death, the elderly Russian producer Alexandra Munchkin stepped in. Munchkin did not understand why The Name of the Rose should be made, so Jean-Jacques Annaud flew with Munchkin to Los Angeles to discuss the financing. The film's budget had risen to $16 million. A meeting was set up with a lawyer who had a check for $15 million, but they feared that Annaud might go over budget. To guarantee that the film's rising budget would be paid for, Munchkin brought in his longtime partner, the Italian financier Franco Coduti, whose previous producing credits had included 1969's The Red Tent, starring Sean Connery. But it was going to take more than French and Italian money to get The Name of the Rose made. Over in Germany, Bernd Eichinger had made his fortune. During the spring of 1984, The Never-Ending Story was released in theaters worldwide, and it triumphed at the box office. Around this time, Eichinger had offered the joint leadership of his company of New Constantine to Thomas Schühly, who had been a veteran of the films of Rainer Werner Fassbinder. Schühly accepted, but he comments that his subsequent collaborations with Eichinger were not without problems. Shortly before Schühly signed his deal with New Constantine, he was approached by Alexander Munchkin about getting involved in The Name of the Rose. Munchkin happened to be one of Schühly's longtime friends. This connection proved to be fortuitous for Bernd Eichinger, not only because Eichinger too wanted to be involved in The Name of the Rose, but because Eichinger also was an admirer of Munchkin's work. Eichinger had also worked with Jean-Jacques Annaud before, having served as the German distributor on Quest for Fire. Thomas Schühly asked Alexander Munchkin whether he would accept a third-party agreement divided amongst 3 European countries, France, Italy, and Germany. To cut a long story short, Munchkin accepted, under the condition that New Constantine would continue the production in the framework of the existing contracts, above all, the direction of Jean-Jacques Annaud. New Constantine agreed, and it was decided that it would be necessary for them to find a U.S. distributor for The Name of the Rose before the film got made. Bernd Eichinger had learned from past experience that waiting until after production to find a distributor could lead to problems. The filmmakers pursued 20th Century Fox as a potential distributor.
What happened is that I went to Deauville. Walter Hill and I had a movie in the festival. I believe it was Streets of Fire, I'm not sure. And Jean-Jacques was there. He may have been the president of the jury, I don't remember, but I know he was there and asked me to have lunch to discuss Name of the Rose. And he took me to a idyllic village, seaport village called Honfleur, because a lot of the great painters painted the dock, the port of Honfleur, right outside of Deauville. I'd never been there, and he chose that. A beautiful day, a beautiful restaurant, 2 beautiful bottles of wine, and I committed to the movie.
The filmmakers then traveled to Los Angeles for a meeting on the 20th Century Fox lot in Century City. Bernd Eichinger later claimed that he and Alexander Munchkin did not get along with the Fox executives. At this point, Munchkin decided to back away from the project, allegedly because he didn't want to have to deal with the studio anymore. Ultimately, it was the charm and passion of Jean-Jacques Annaud which won over the Fox executives, and Annaud formed a bond with Lawrence Gordon which kept up the studio's morale for the project. While the production was slowly taking shape, Jean-Jacques Annaud would end up living in Munich, Germany for a couple of years, scouting locations, getting a screenplay developed, and gathering the financing together. Jean-Jacques Annaud states that the screenplay for The Name of the Rose evolved over the course of 17 different versions. The first 9 drafts were written with Alain Godard. The next 2 drafts were written in early 1984 with Gerard Brock, who by this time had become an agoraphobe who never left his flat. Brock's script was subsequently translated into English by John Brownjohn. In the fall of 1984, Howard Franklin was brought in to write a new version of the script. However, Franklin states that he wasn't given drafts of any script that Gerard Brock had started out with, just some rough outlines.
When I was brought on, it was a 20th Century Fox book. They were going to finance the movie. I had come to their attention because executive on it was a guy named Bob Cort, the Fox executive, the vice president in charge of it. Mm-hmm. And he was also in charge of Romancing the Stone, which I had been brought in on a couple months earlier to write the reshoots. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, he thought the guy who worked on Romancing the Stone would be good at The Name of the Rose. You wouldn't necessarily equate it, but I think he saw something in my writing suitable for it.
We had Quest for Fire at Fox, and I had marketed Quest for Fire. And I'm trying to remember when Arne Milchan came on. I'm not entirely sure. I read Eco's book, became absolutely fascinated with it. I was involved in the script development and so forth with Jean-Jacques, who was a friend of both mine and my wife's. My wife knew him ages even before I did. I always respected Howard. He was a supremely intelligent writer and concise. I remember he was a concise writer.
And I was kind of told, find a way to write dialogue so that it didn't sound too English. After all, it's not set in England anyway, and why do all these historical dramas have to have this kind of English-sounding dialogue? I was with CA at the time, and they didn't particularly want me to take the job for that reason. They thought it was a momentum killer. I was going to be out of the country. It wasn't a studio. It wasn't, in any genre that you could establish yourself, like, yeah, he's the king of monastery movies. They weren't that thrilled. I think it was kind of its own thing, kind of on the side. I'll tell you what I was given.
Sure, yeah.
Was the novel, obviously. Mm-hmm. And Gerard Brock, who's a very eminent, one of the greatest screenwriters ever, wrote with Polanski and stuff. So certainly somebody I knew a lot about. Mm-hmm. He had written a kind of prose outline with these very dense paragraphs, one after another. Probably ran to 40 pages or something. That he did not attempt to write dialogue or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It seemed like he was trying to break the back of this, this monster book. For whatever reason, that's what Jean-Jacques had commissioned. Mm-hmm. And I was given that and worked from that a lot.
After Fox hired you to be on the project, what were your initial discussions with JJ like, your first meeting with him and stuff?
Well, I first met him when he was here in Los Angeles, and we met in Bob Cort's office. But one of the things about when it became an international production was the Germans were not signatory to the Writers Guild. I love the Writers Guild, but you're not allowed to work on a movie that's not with a signatory company in the continental United States, which was not a problem because that meant I was in Paris for months and months and months working on it with Jean-Jacques every day. I worked in a hotel in Paris, but also Jean-Jacques and his wife, Laurence, who he also works with, the script supervisor, had a very charming country house on literally an old mill on a river where the mill was turning all the time. So we did some work there as well. So that was among the main appeal of the job to me, was to get to work in Europe for several months. And so I had a lot of contact with him and also the French producers that were involved. I was not working from a script. I didn't know I was doing a rewrite, really. What happens is you kind of invest in William as this brilliant guy, and everybody loves a brilliant guy, and you like knowing that he's brilliant. And then he seems to make this terrible mistake where he says it's suicide, and then somebody else dies, and everybody's looking at him thinking he's an idiot or corrupt or something. And that's when the real suspense starts, because more than anything, you want him to be vindicated. So that was kind of the spine I took, was that was the kind of motor of the movie. One thing I noticed in my script is that there's a poem that describes the name of the rose. Didn't make it in the movie. I was thrilled. I thought I was going to sneak a poem into a Hollywood movie, but it didn't make it. I noticed for some reason, and maybe because he's less prone to improvisation than the other actors, all of F. Murray Abraham's dialogue, as he says it, seems to like scan perfectly with what I wrote. Whereas the others, it's not quite the same, but he did me good. I was in Europe a lot, but I was not in Europe when they shot the movie, because it took a while before they got it together, whatever, maybe they had to wait for Sean Connery. But as happens as often as not, it took a while. And by that point, I was working on other stuff.
Yeah.
I only met Sean Connery once years later, like at some event or awards thing or something here in LA. And I went up to him and introduced myself, and I mentioned I worked on it. And he was very charming. He shook my hand. I remember he had the thickest padding on his hands of any human I've ever seen. He had very powerful hands. So now I was told that the reason Birkin came in after me was precisely because he was an Englishman, and when the German financiers took it over, they preferred it to have that Anglophile kind of sound to it, which and possibly also because I don't remember at what point Sean Connery came in, but he's certainly UK. So I mean, I would have made myself available if I remember. Look, I don't know if it's true. Maybe it looks pretty similar to what I wrote when I follow along with it. But he was moving on to Birkin, I was told, because they want an English voice. And I remember feeling a little bit, well, I can do that, but I was also busy. That was a time when there was a lot of script development in Hollywood, and you just kind of went from one job to another. It's the good old days. Yeah. I never knew who Godard, is that his name? The one who's he was never mentioned to me. And the first time I knew that there was another writer other than myself, Gerard Brock, and Birkin was when I saw the movie. And there was a fourth name in the credits.
I don't know. Maybe that's why they thought that for Sean it needed a more English touch to it. I don't know.
In early 1985, Jean-Jacques Annaud tried to combine the Brock and Franklin drafts, but neither he nor Bernd Eichinger were happy with the result. So they decided to enlist one last screenwriter to shape the script into a cohesive whole. Enter 39-year-old English screenwriter Andrew Birkin, who had been working on movies ever since his early work as a production assistant in the mid-1960s. On 2001: A Space Odyssey, Birkin started out as the set's T-boy, before Stanley Kubrick miraculously promoted him to photographer. Birkin was responsible for shooting some of the film's most innovative visual sequences. During his early years as a production assistant, Birkin had also crossed paths with Sean Connery, and recalls a moment in the late 1960s when Connery heroically plucked a splinter out of Birkin's foot. Later in his career, Birkin had obtained a steady career as a screenwriter, with credits including the 1978 BBC miniseries The Lost Boys, 1981's The Omen 3: The Final Conflict, and, that same year, the Academy Award-nominated short film Sredny Vashtar, on which Birkin made his directorial debut. In the early 1980s, Birkin had also worked with Francis Ford Coppola and later Paramount to get an adaptation of Peter Pan off the ground, but the plug was pulled on the project when Paramount received word that Steven Spielberg was developing his own Peter Pan project. Flash forward to the year 1985. Birkin had just come off the unpleasant experience of writing the screenplay for Bruce Beresford's King David when American Zoetrope executive Tom Sternberg recommended Birkin's services to Bernd Eichinger. Birkin was brought into the project and comments, "I met Bernd Eichinger in Malibu in February 1985. Then Jean-Jacques Annaud came in April and stayed for a few days in the Althaus in North Wales, by which time I'd read the book."
No, I thought it was great. I mean, I loved his style, and I loved all the stuff about Aristotle and the Lost Book and the business about laughter, and we wanted to put in rather more than actually arrived in the movie.
And so you have to imagine that you have these three Europeans sitting at the very edge of the Western world in Malibu, talking about the cradle of the Western world, Aristoteles. It's a very beautiful image, you know.
What I wanted to do was to take Hitchcock at his word, which is, you know, if you want to talk about philosophy, make sure you're sitting on a time bomb. Well, the whole movie is a time bomb in a way.
That's right.
Jean-Jacques, he didn't show me any scripts to start with, so which is probably the right way to go about it. He didn't want me to be influenced by the scripts they already had. Or it was like start again. Fine by me.
Later, Birkin did look over the earlier drafts. He says that he never saw Alain Godar's contributions, and that he'd never heard of him until he saw his name in the credits. He loved Gerard Brock's draft, but states it would have cost zillions and run for hours. When he read Howard Franklin's draft, he wittily described it as Raiders of the Lost Monastery, but he adds that he's sure the final draft, which he worked on with Annaud, fell into the same trap.
And I think that Umberto Eco, he didn't have script approval, but they obviously wanted to keep him sweet. I talked to him on the telephone a few times. I mean, I'd ring him up and say, you know, on page 92 it says this, and on page 147 it says that. And I'm thinking that there's a disconnect, or did I miss something? And he would always say, oh, I was hoping no one would notice that.
Birkin comments, towards the end of my 5-week Munich stay, Jean-Jacques and I spent a long day running through the entire script, making minor changes here and there and everywhere. Around tea time, not that we got any, Bernd came in to ask something. I was in the middle of trying to look at an earlier version and without thinking hit Code plus L plus Enter, L being look. There followed a hideous grinding noise, followed by silence and a blank screen. 10 minutes later, I was in my car driving to the local Alvedi HQ, which was opposite the Dachau concentration camp. A technician examined the floppy disk, asked me what I'd done. When I told him I pressed L for look, he gasped, "Ach so, in the German program, L equals Loschin. You have exterminated the disk." When I got back to the office, I found a bottle of champagne, a pot of caviar, and a note from Bernd, to help you work all night, which is what I did, speedily correcting all that I could remember. On the minus side, doubtless a few gems got forgotten, but on the plus side, it definitely gave the dialogue a better flow. I finished it in May and took it and the floppy disks out to Munich, where Bernd had rented a local Alvedi 1010. I revised my version, number 2, which Jean-Jacques and I, with a lot of input from Bernd, then entangled with his earlier combo version. Jean-Jacques Annaud understood that suspense would be an important element to focus on in order for The Name of the Rose to work as a movie. He read from Francois Truffaut's book of interviews with master of suspense Alfred Hitchcock. A French film critic named Le Brun also gave Annaud some advice about how to make The Name of the Rose suspenseful.
All three died because of a book which kills, or for which men will kill. I therefore urge you to grant me access to the library.
For the lead role of William of Baskerville, ICM partners suggested Michael Caine, but Bernd Eichinger refused to cast Caine.
There was quite a lot of discussion about Michael Caine at one time, and I remember that.
Meanwhile, creative artist agency founder Mike Ovitz kept insisting that Jean-Jacques Annaud cast one of his most famous Hollywood clients, Sean Connery, in the role of William of Baskerville. Annaud was resistant. How could Connery, who was most famous for playing the ultimate ladies' man in James Bond, be at all convincing as William of Baskerville, a man who wasn't just a monk, but who was also essentially a middle-aged virgin? A man who had never had sex with women and had instead pledged his love to religion and literature. Annaud didn't buy it. In the 1960s, Connery had been one of the biggest stars on the planet. As James Bond, Connery had shot to superstardom playing the kind of action movie hero that every man wanted to be and every woman simply wanted.
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
Such success in the 60s afforded Connery the occasional chance to flex his acting muscle in dramatic films like Hitchcock's Marnie and Sidney Lumet's The Hill.
I'm a regular soldier because I couldn't get a bloody job in Civvy Street.
In the 1970s, Connery moved away from James Bond and began taking more creative risks as an actor in films like Sidney Lumet's The Offense, John Boorman's Zardoz, John Milius's The Wind and the Lion, John Huston's masterpiece, The Man Who Would Be King.
Peachy, I'm heartily ashamed for getting you killed instead of going home rich like you deserve to, on account of me being so bleeding high and bloody mighty.
In 1980, Connery's lawyer, Gary Hendler, left the law firm, and Hendler's partner, Barry Hirsch, succeeded to be Connery's new attorney. But in the 1980s, Connery's track record at the box office started to get more uneven. Terry Gilliam's Time Bandits had been successful, but Peter Hyams' Outland and Richard Brooks' Wrong is Right had not done as well. Of all the movies Connery made in the early 80s, the one that I happen to like the most is Fred Zinnemann's majestic mountain climbing picture 5 Days, One Summer, but hardly anyone saw it. Connery then reluctantly returned to James Bond in Irvin Kershner's unofficial 007 entry Never Say Never Again, which made a lot of money, but the production was out of control. No one could deny that Connery was still perfectly effective as a ladies' man, but he had entered middle age, he was giving up James Bond for good this time, and his career needed a fresh perspective. Somehow he needed to reinvent his image for moviegoers. One day, while Jean-Jacques Annaud was still developing his Name of the Rose film, the director was told, "You'll have a visitor today," and Sean Connery showed up.
He came to Munich, arrived in my office. He took the screenplay, opened it, and he said, "So listen, boy." I was boy. And boy listened, and I remember shivering. He was reading my lines, the line I'd been working on for almost 2 years, with exact intonations that I had dreamt of. And I remember I said, "Could you hold on?" And then I run downstairs, see my producer Bernd Eichinger. I burst into the room. I said, "We've got William of Ockham. We've got William Baskerville. He's really wonderful. We've got him. I was jumping everywhere, and I must say that I do not regret my choice.
Connery's lawyer, Barry Hirsch, was a big fan of the book, and he agreed that the casting of Connery as William was right on. Barry Hirsch recalls, Bernd wanted desperately to have Sean do the movie. As I recall correctly, Sean was a little uncertain at the beginning creatively about the movie. Then he came over, and I think we made the deal rather easily in Hollywood terms. There was no screaming and yelling, and I think the deal came together quite nicely. Bernd Eichinger would later hire Barry Hirsch to represent him as well in the years to come. According to Thomas Schühly, Sean Connery asked for a guarantee pay or play of $1 million salary. New Constantine didn't have this kind of money, so Bernd Eichinger asked Thomas Schühly to reach out to the wealthy German media mogul Dr. Leo Kirsch and ask him for the money. Schühly had previously worked for Kirsch as the managing director of his Iduna film company. Kirsch guaranteed $1 million for the filmmakers, and a deal was made. The filmmakers got Sean Connery, while Kirsch got a substantial control of New Constantine. Unfortunately, the decision to cast Connery was met with immediate disdain by Umberto Eco.
When I said how excited I was to be with Sean Connery in this adventure, he said dryly, "Oh, 007 in a monastery, eh?" When I said to the writer of the novel that I had hired Sean Connery, he almost fainted. His wife yelled, because in those days Sean was at the bottom of the wave, he was in a low of his career, and we were in business with Columbia, and they decided not to go ahead with the movie because we had hired Sean Connery. It was, in their view, in the view of the executive in those days, such a bad idea.
Of course, he was one of the world's biggest stars. None of us was aware that he had had a period of relative the less important films. But my father has, during the 60s, he has dealt a lot with 007 and the novels by Ian Fleming and the popularity of 007, so he was extremely familiar. Sean Connery was an icon for him too. So that's his perplexity came from that, if anything.
This is my novice, Adjo, the youngest son of the Baron of Melk.
For the part of William of Baskerville's young apprentice, Adzo, Jean-Jacques Annaud went all over the world, searching for the right young actor to play the part. The main casting director on the film was Lynn Stallmaster, but another one of Annaud's acquaintances was casting director Mary Jo Slater, who described Jean-Jacques Annaud as the most beautiful man I've ever seen. And it was Mary Jo who cast actor Dwight Weist to provide the voiceover narration for Adzo as an old man. Mary Jo's son was 16-year-old Christian Slater. Christian had done a large amount of theater and television work, and he'd been in a small handful of films, but he was not yet a household name. Knowing that Jean-Jacques Annaud was still looking for an actor to play the younger version of Adzo in The Name of the Rose, Mary Jo, who was working in New York at the time, brought Christian in. The reason why Mary Jo believed that her son was right for the role of Adzo was because Christian had already performed alongside Sigourney Weaver in a Broadway production of Macbeth, he had performed in a production of Oliver alongside Orson Bean, he had understudied in a production of David Copperfield, and he could do accent. At the time, Christian was misbehaving and didn't come for his callback, but Jean-Jacques Annaud liked him, and Mary Jo recalls that the director told her, "We want Christian." Annaud recalls that once, Christian even admitted that he didn't know his lines because he came in with a hangover, but that didn't matter. Annaud states that he thought that Christian was divine.
My master says that the simple folk always pay for all. But please, Holy Mother, do not let it be so.
The part of Adzo would be challenging for the young actor, especially because he would have to do a risque sex scene with a comely peasant girl. Mary Jo states that at the time of casting, she had no idea her son was going to be doing a lovemaking scene in the film. Later, she learned from Annaud that because Christian was still a minor at the time, it was not a scene which could be filmed in America. For the part of the Abbey's undertaker, Severinus, Annaud decided to cast the Russian actor Elya Baskin, having been impressed by Baskin's performance in Paul Mazursky's Moscow on the Hudson.
I think it was after Moscow on the Hudson. I think it was William Morrison. My agent, she said that there is a French director who is interested in meeting me. It wasn't an audition. And I came to meet him at what's the famous hotel near Crescent Heights. All celebrities stay there. So we met there, and he had his still camera with him. He was like dancing around me, taking pictures from this angle, from that angle. Yeah. And it was kind of very unusual interview because we were talking like you and me.
Yeah.
And then, I got an offer, and I had to choose between two things, and that was so extraordinarily interesting. So I got a coach, Chris Black, wonderful man, an Englishman who lived in Rome for most of his life, and thanks to him I found out what real Romans eat.
We found the body after a hailstorm, horribly mutilated, dashed against a rock at the foot of the tower, and a window which was, how shall I say this,
Which was found closed.
Somebody told you.
For the part of the abbot, Annaud cast French actor Michael Lonsdale, who had previously played a clergy in Orson Welles' 1962 film adaptation of Kafka's The Trial, and who had played the Commissioner Lebel in Fred Zinnemann's adaptation of The Day of the Jackal. Annaud states that Lonsdale fit so well in the production of The Name of the Rose because he was bilingual. For the part of the girl, Jean-Jacques Annaud considered 3 actresses, Valeria Golino, Patricia Adriani, and 21-year-old Chilean actress Valentina Vargas. Vargas had the first audition, and when Christian Slater saw it, the young actor immediately fell in love with her. Jean-Jacques Annaud states that Slater didn't even want to test with the other actresses. Vargas then met for dinner in Rome with Jean-Jacques Annaud, Mary Jo Slater, and Christian. At the dinner, Annaud gave Vargas the part.
I was in New York at the time, and I came home from a late night from a party, and my agent Fernando Piazza from Rome called me, and he said, Urs, tomorrow you have a casting at the Stork Club in New York. And that's impossible, for me to do a casting. And he said, it's the Name of the Rose. Do you know the book? And I said, no, I never read it. Modern classic, you have to read the book. It's a very small book, he said, because he knew that I didn't really love to read. Yeah. So when I finally found the book, it was like over 500 pages, Yeah. And I was smiling and thought, oh my God, I can't read the book. But I had to prepare for the meeting. Jean-Jacques Annaud and Bernd Eichinger, they were on the plane to meet me in New York. So I met Jean-Jacques. It was brilliant, and it went very well. And then he said, would you mind to walk with me at the park, across the street? And he always ran around with the camera. And he said to me, can you write down your name? And because I had a hard time, I didn't really write. I was more like painting my name. And he said, stop. I found Venantius. And when I read the script, it was actually in my death scene, and that's very interesting. So at that moment, I wanted to hide that my body was shaking, and it was exactly what it was looking for. So like that, I got the part.
Oh my God.
And then I think, which was very funny, was at the first day, when we had the press conference at the Abbey in Germany, the next morning he wanted to come to do makeup and for my haircut. And he came in and he looked at me and said, you're the only one I want to see the makeup because you are the only beautiful monk in the movie. And then he told me that 6-7 years ago, he did this drawing, waking up, and he imagined like this Venantius has to look. And then he told me, when I met you in New York, I knew it was you. Wow. It's amazing, And he said to me, one of the problems he had, that the agents always sent him white faces. And Venantius for him was a Moor. Wow, yeah. And for him was important to have this black face in the film.
Actually, it was me that approached him about playing Salvatore. And I very, very rarely reach out to a filmmaker. I've only done it twice in my life. Once was for The Name of the Rose, and the other one was for Drive with Nicholas Winding Refn.
Oh, wow. 4 years after he had worked with Jean-Jacques Annaud on Quest for Fire, Ron Perlman had taken some film and television roles here and there, but by the mid-1980s, Perlman found himself out of work.
Terribly, terribly out of work, profoundly out of work, completely and unexcusably out of work, out of money, out of everything. But I read that Jean-Jacques had obtained the rights for the film of Name of the Rose. So I went out and read the book and discovered the role of Salvatore, which would have required the same sort of exercise, where I would take something so abstract, somebody who was mentally challenged, but yet who spoke 7 languages, somebody who couldn't tie his own shoes, but wanted to fuck all the time. This was a character that was completely an invention of the great imagination of Umberto Eco, something that never existed in real time. And it would have afforded me a similarly rewarding experience to the one I had when I created the role of Amilcar in Quest for Fire, with the same filmmaker. And I wrote him a letter saying, hey, this is how I feel. I'm not sure where you are in the process of putting this film together. I just want to put it in your consciousness that this would mean this much to me if I was to get another opportunity to have a similar type of creative, mind-blowing experience as we had already once before. And he got back to me immediately and said he's having political issues, that the film was a co-production of Germany and Italy, and that the Italian government had put in $4 million. And when they found out that there were no Italian actors in the movie, they said that they were going to pull the $4 million out unless they found an Italian actor to play an important pivotal role. So he hired a guy named Franco Franchi, which was like the Red Skelton of Italy, to play the role of Salvatore. He explained all this to me. He said, it's purely political. It's something that I have to do in order to actually end up making the film. Please forgive me. If it was a perfect world, you would definitely be playing this role. I get a call about 2-3 months later. I know that the movie is already in production because it's been announced in Variety. I know that they're about 3 weeks into production. I get a call at 5-something in the morning in Los Angeles. A woman gets on the phone named Anna Gross, who's co-producing the movie with Bernd Eichinger, and says, are you able to get on an airplane today at 11:30 to play the role of Salvatore in Name of the Rose? And I hung up. I thought it was like some asshole fucking with me, you know. And she called back and she said, listen, I'm standing next to Jean-Jacques Annaud. I'm going to put him on the phone. But before I do, I need an answer. Can you get on an airplane today at 11:30? Through the glory of egos and bad strategies, Franco Franchi fucked himself out of playing Salvatore and fucked me into playing Salvatore. And when the minute Jean-Jacques saw the opportunity to fire his ass because he was acting like a complete dickhead, he acted. Yeah. And that's how I ended up playing the role. Well, he was a mystery to me. I couldn't figure out all of these disparate things all in one entity. On the plane ride, on that 11:30 flight from Los Angeles to, I guess it was Berlin, because I started shooting in Germany. I had the novel, I had a version of the script, I had a doobie that I had smoked on my way to the airport to try to expand my mind. I was really, really trying to solve this puzzle of how does a mentally challenged guy find himself at the heart of a religious discussion, almost Aristotelian religious discussion, where people are being burnt at the stake left and right, where he speaks 7 languages, but all in a jumble. So he has 7 identities and no identity. This was like a puzzle to me. And I decided that I needed a model. I needed to discover what that looks like in a real human. So when I arrived in Germany, I asked them to take me on a tour of some institutions that housed mentally challenged people. And I went to about 3 or 4 of them. Some of them were really harrowing and disturbing, what I witnessed in terms of, when the human mind goes awry. But there was this one place where I discovered this very horny, kind of giggly kind of guy who was being given the most simplistic of tasks to do. And he would do them in the most simplistic way, but he was constantly distracted by the fact that he wanted to touch all of the breasts of all the girls in the room. Whenever he got his chance and copped a little feel, he would be the happiest, most giggly guy in the world. And I began to see, okay, this is what Salvatore begins to look like. And then what I did was, I knew that the book had been translated into 195 languages. I got a copy of each of the book in each of the languages that Salvatore speaks, which is Latin, French, Italian, English, German, whatever. There were a few others. And I extracted all of the dialogue that Eco had put in all of the languages. And then I just went eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and I constructed these sentences that Salvatore would speak with 1 word English, 1 word French, 1 word Latin. And I created a hodgepodge and presented it to Jean-Jacques, and he said, this is how you're going to speak in the movie.
Salvatore!
For the role of Brother Remigio, a rebellious Dulcinite heretic, Annaud cast Austrian actor Helmut Qualtinger, who in real life had been a very different kind of rebel.
Mr. Qualtinger, he was an icon in Vienna. He was a very, very famous Nazi opponent. He probably is the most important actor in Austria since the end of the war.
All the actors had trailers, and I had to share it with one actor, but I didn't knew at home. And when I entered, this big, tall, bulky man was sitting in there, and he spoke with his heavy Austrian accent, and I answered him in German. And he was very happy. He said, you speak German. I'm Helmut Qualtinger. And then he looked at me and said, I hope you didn't bring any food along because the refrigerator is full. I said, I didn't bring anything. So afterwards I went to open the fridge, and the entire fridge was full with little red wine bottles.
I just found him to be phenomenal collaborator, as I did everyone in the film. I mean, Michael Lonsdale, beautiful actor, accomplished actor, has done one phenomenal big studio movie performance after another. So humble, so sweet. So how can I help you give a better performance? All of them were like that.
Brethren, if you please.
For the part of the film's primary antagonist, Bernardo Gui, Annaud considered casting F. Murray Abraham, who had recently won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of Salieri in Amadeus.
Because you are unjust, unfair, unkind, I will block you. I swear it.
The winner is F. Murray Abraham.
It would be a lie if I told you I didn't know what to say, because I've been working on this speech for about 25 years.
Annaud asked Amadeus' director, Milos Forman, about his own experience working with Abraham, and recalls how Forman responded that if Annaud was considering Abraham for the role of a nasty villain, then Annaud wouldn't really need to direct him. The first meeting between Annaud and Abraham took place over lunch in Cologne. The meeting did not go well.
He said, now that I have this Academy Award, I'll make you directors suffer. And I said, why is that? Isn't it great to have an Academy Award? He said, no, because, it comes out of so much suffering that now I'll have my revenge.
Abraham didn't want to play the supporting role of the film's villain. He wanted the lead role of William of Baskerville. In a 1986 People magazine interview, Abraham confirmed that he initially refused the part of Bernardo Gui. His argument at the time was, I'm tired of heavies, I want to do a comedy. Abraham claimed that he had second thoughts after reading Umberto Eco's book and becoming intrigued by its mix of mystery and intellectualism. The salary being offered to Abraham, $750,000, was tempting, and so was the assurance that Abraham's family could visit on the 3-month location filming in West Germany and Italy. Abraham also claimed to People magazine that he wanted to work alongside Sean Connery, an actor whom he said he respected.
Well, F. Murray and I had done a play in New York, an Isaac Bashevis Singer play, which we tried out in Washington, D.C., and then went to Broadway. So F. Murray and I were already really, really close pals. Really, really dug each other. We went all over Rome together, just sightseeing, and ate together almost every night. And, so that was a beautiful reunion. Sean Connery was the biggest movie star I'd ever met to date, much less worked with. I was pretty much in awe of him. I was almost unable to speak around him because I was in so much awe of him. I regarded him as a vestige of the last days of the great masculine movie stars, the ones that we came to know in the 30s and 40s, real guys. The thing that made it beautiful was that Sean was a real fun guy, loved hanging out and swapping jokes and anecdotes, and loved going out at the end of the day and having a few drinks and, you know, swapping more stories and laughing and talking about music and theater and film, women and wine and song, and, you know, and so he made what would have been a very uncomfortable relationship really, really easy and smooth.
On the first day, we were in Kloster Eberbach. There was the international press conference. And the moment the door went open, it was amazing. I only seen the presence of Sean. And in that moment, I realized the difference between a world star and a superstar. It was incredible. I was flashed. To show his personality, because I was the only unknown actor there, after the press conference, when everyone walked out, he stopped and he came to me and said, Venantius, my name is Sean. And to me, it was fantastic.
To shoot The Name of the Rose, Jean-Jacques Annaud needed a cinematographer whom he felt could evoke the touch of a Caravaggio painting. He decided to hire Tonino Dellicoli, best known for his work with Sergio Leone on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, and Once Upon a Time in America. During this time, Dellicoli would also shoot the film Ginger and Fred for Federico Fellini, and several more crew members who had worked for Fellini on that film would hop over to The Name of the Rose.
Fellini was still around and using all those incredible faces. By the way, I used a lot of his crew, and I must say Federico visited the set many, many times, and I was very touched.
Production designer Dante Ferretti was tasked with building a real monastery for the film, which would be constructed in Italy, a few miles north of Rome.
Jean-Jacques Annaud chose Tonino Dellicoli and Dante Ferretti because making publicity with Dante Ferretti and Tonino Dellicoli, he has pleasure was with people. And for the co-production, that was very important to have all the money for the RAI and to find the 35% of the film, to have production designer and the director of photography from Italy. So that was easy to have all the crew of Fellini.
To design the costumes for The Name of the Rose, the filmmakers brought in Gabriella Pescucci, who had previously worked on such films as Luchino Visconti's Ludwig, Federico Fellini's City of Women, and Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America. In later years, Pescucci would emerge as one of the most in-demand costume designers in the world, winning the Academy Award for Best Costume Design for her work on Martin Scorsese's adaptation of The Age of Innocence. On The Name of the Rose, Pescucci recalls that she may have gotten hired when Dante Ferretti suggested her name to Thomas Schühly. Pescucci states, "When I met Jean-Jacques Annaud, we talked about the various aspects of the movie. The main topic for me and JJ was the aging of the monks' costumes. It had to be definitely rough, very aged, and realistic. My creative development was mainly regarding the use of the right materials in order to have the realistic aged aspect of the costumes. I started my research of rough wools with a handmade aspect. Then we dyed the wool, and after manufacturing the tunics, we dyed them again unevenly, scratching the hem and the points of contact, and mending the fabric, and finally dirtying it down. Many passages and lots of research to obtain the right effect. For my creative vision had been very useful the study of Le Duca, a French illustrator of the 19th century, in which the shape and description of the costumes are accurate, but of course I had to take off all the romantic aura of his illustrations. Then I made research on the few original pieces still existing." The line producer on The Name of the Rose would be Gerald Morin, who had started out his career as a film critic. In the 1970s, Morin spent 6 years working under Federico Fellini, having charmed his way into becoming Fellini's production secretary on Roma, second assistant director on Amarcord, and assistant to the director on Fellini's Casanova. After that, Morin's credits included working as unit manager on Richard Donner's Ladyhawke.
So I remember that was a Friday night. I returned back from Switzerland, and I stopped in Cinecittà. makeup girl said me, oh, the son of Cristaldi, who work with you already, asked me to contact you because his father need you absolutely immediately. So I called Cristaldi, Franco, and he said me, oh, Jean-Jacques Annaud is coming on Monday. He wants to have an idea if he can shoot The Name of the Rose in Italy. I said to Cristaldi, I know The Name of the Rose, I read already the book. Cristaldi said me, you make already all the location for Donald Sutherland, so you know a different castle in Italy. So can you suggest for Monday, because Jean-Jacques Annaud was coming on Monday, something? I said, no problem. During the weekend, I take all the pictures of the different castle and convents from Lady Hawke. So Jean-Jacques Annaud came on Monday, and so on Monday already a lot of pictures with some idea for The Name of the Rose. The best thing is not to go in different countries, is to build the convent. We don't have to pay the hotel for the crew. We have only to pay overtime 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour at the evening. So it's about a good idea. And we have Cinecittà is cover set. I have the possibility to sign a deal for a place where we can build the convent. The cost is about $5,000 to have an option. We pay that. So Cristaldi said, if you want, I give you $5,000 as gift for you, for your job, and you do what you want. And I go to the owner of this landscape and I sign a deal, an option with the $5,000. And so all the decision comes that we will shoot some scene in Germany because we need to have the co-production with Germany.
Sure.
And Germany was co-producer at 45%. 35% was Cristaldi and 20% was Mnouchkine. During the pre-preparation, I was production manager. On the title of the film, I'm production supervisor. But I was more a line producer as production supervisor. Thomas Schühly said me, okay, if you give me all the construction in 6 months finished, I give you all the money of line producer and not as a production manager. It was really a pleasure to work with Thomas Schühly. I prepare all the budget and I make a budget of $40 million. Bernd Eichinger and Thomas Schühly don't know that I understand perfectly German. Bernd Eichinger said, this guy is completely crazy. The film has to cost $12 million, not a penny more. And I say tranquilly after, okay, if you want, ask somebody in Germany to make you the budget on this film. If somebody that the film costs $12 million is a liar. 1 month later, they call me back and they say, yeah, you're right.
Thus, The Name of the Rose would be filmed in 2 different countries. The interior scenes in Germany would be filmed first. During this time, the exteriors for the monastery in Italy would be constructed. Once filming in Germany was finished, the production would move over to Italy, by which time construction of the monastery would be complete and ready for the cameras. The Name of the Rose officially began filming in November 1985.
Cameras are absolutely forbidden.
Oh, you got the part?
You can kiss his ring. Kiss your ass.
Kiss the ring and get luck.
Kiss the ring.
No?
Kiss me!
Come to me, you pretty maiden. I will castrate you.
Oh, really? I'm very flattered.
Knut! Knut! Amène-moi le reste des figurants qui sont prêts, là. Amène-moi les autres figurants qui sont prêts.
Film reviewer Helen Chavez reported that the first couple of months of production took place at Eberbach Abbey in the Rhine Valley, where various interior scenes would be shot.
It is not loud enough. There is no faith in what you're singing, like not concerned at all. You're men of faith. Let's go back.
Dear brethren, I leave such worldly matters to younger men.
For the role of the secret murderer, the Venerable Jorge, Annaud and Bernd Eichinger had initially cast John Huston, but after production began, complications arose.
He had a problem. He had asthma. He wanted warm sets, and I wanted cold sets where the breath could be seen.
Production had already started. And John Huston told Bernd, like, listen, I can't do this movie. I'm too sick. I probably won't see the end of production.
Another thing was bothering me with John. I didn't want to say too early that it was such an important character. And if it was John Huston playing the part, I think people would have believed that he was going to show up in the story and have an important role.
Annaud replaced Huston with Fyodor Chaliapin Jr., whose acting career had only just started to gain some traction in his late 70s. However, because of this, the plug was almost pulled on the film's distribution deal with Fox.
John Huston was in the 20th Century Fox contract. He was listed as a condition for this movie to be financed by 20th Century Fox. So Bernd flies to New York to meet with Scott Rudin, who was now the head of production. So Scott says, okay, I have to think about it. I'll call you in a bit. So Bernd goes back to his hotel room in New York, waiting for the phone call. His flight was in the afternoon. Nothing's happening. There's no phone call. And Bernd said, okay, this is it. I have to. He takes his bag, goes down the elevator into the lobby and knows his movie's collapsed. And then just before he reaches the exit, he just has this idea and goes back to the concierge and says, by the way, is there a problem with your phone system? And he's like, yes, we have a problem with our phone system. Our phones broke down. And he's like, oh my God, Bernd races onto the street. He finds a quarter and then reaches Scott's assistant. And she's like, oh my God, I've been trying to reach you. I couldn't get through. Didn't know what to do. I didn't know what hotel you stayed in. Of course we're okay. Scott is totally okay with supporting the movie and not pulling out. And so it was just a quarter that saved Name of the Rose.
For the pig slaughtering scene, Jean-Jacques Annaud explains that a couple of pigs were used to create the bloody illusion. A real struggling pig was used for the medium shots, but it was not actually killed on screen. The carcass of another pig that was already dead was used for the close-ups.
Fellow Franciscans, you must leave this place at once.
My favorite is my Bill Hickey story. I lived on 121 Bank Street, which was across the street from the Uta Hagen studio, where Bill Hickey taught acting for 40 years. At the end of his teaching day, he would always go to the White Horse Bar around the corner and have a few. And I would always walk my dog around 1:30 in the morning, which is when those bars closed. And on several occasions, I had to take it upon myself to get Bill Hickey to his house. We'd never met, but he would be a guy trying to get home. He would be in trouble. And I got him home. First time I got him home, I had to get his address out of him. He gave it to me finally, through a haze of alcoholic or whatever. And I got him home. And then I arrived in Germany to start playing Salvatore. And Jean-Jacques says, Ron, I want you to meet someone. He's dying to meet you. He's a big fan of yours. His name is William Hickey. And William Hickey comes and gives me a hug and says, it's so nice to meet you. And I didn't have the heart to tell him we had already met.
I told you a story about Christian Slater. I think it was his first glass of wine with us.
All that remains of a dead rose is... it's fucking mice all over the place.
In early January 1986, production then moved over to Dante Ferretti's man-made monastery set in Italy. Production would not wrap until late March of that year.
Dante Ferretti, who was a set designer, he made it look so authentic. It was like I got goosebumps when I saw the whole thing, chicken running around. Yeah. And I think they even dressed extras when we first arrived there in period costumes, so we dove into this atmosphere that was absolutely fantastic. It's very good to work with a director who knows what he's doing, who loves what he's doing. Yeah. I was fortunate I worked with a few great directors, but Jean-Jacques was one of them.
For the scenes filmed in Italy, Jean-Jacques Annaud hired Stefano Eco to work on the set as one of the assistant directors.
Perhaps it was during that trip in the countryside that Jean-Jacques told me if I wanted to, I was skeptical myself because my father wrote the book. I was the only one speaking all 4 languages, more or less currently. And so I said, okay, I can be useful. And the film had 2 assistant directors with great experience. One was Victor Służanski, but he lived in Rome. And the other one was Gianni Arduini, arguably a very mythical figure in Roman cinema, a living film school as long as he lived. Victor was as sweet as Gianni was hard, but in the end, it was a team of incredibly professional and expert people. And so I tried to learn something. I was really a bit lost, but I had to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to dress some people that came down from the hills around Rome who spoke a dialect that even Italians wouldn't understand. And most of them were either dwarfs or people with some sort of deformity, because that's what the director was looking for. And the makeup and the costume crew was entirely German. So these people, I had to do strange things there at 4 o'clock in the morning in one of the few winters in which in Rome it actually snowed. I cannot forget the first time I went to lunch in Rome with Jean-Jacques and Tonino Deli Colli. I still go to the same restaurant. They brought me to 2 places. Tonino brought me to another place which is close to my home today, and he's another one whom I remember with great affection, and he was, Italian cinema personified.
Yeah, and then Sergio Leone visited the set. I'm like, really? All these big Italian famous directors, were they all?
Yeah. Back then it was one of the first big international productions being shot in Italy after a long hiatus since the 70s. So Sergio Leone, yes, I vaguely remember he came, I saw him from a distance. Fellini, probably, yes.
Your father also visited the set. What did he think to kind of see this interpretation of his book coming to life?
He came and stayed, for a couple of hours. It was very much a diplomatic visit, if you will. He kept his distance from the director's storytelling.
Ora, il film che stanno facendo non è il mio bambino. Sarà il bambino di...
Der Film, den Sie gerade machen, ist nicht mein Kind. Es wird das Kind von Jean-Jacques Annaud sein. Natürlich hoffe ich schon im eigenen Interesse, dass es sehr schön wird. Aber insgesamt bin ich viel freier im Umgang mit diesem Kind.
One of the challenges of production was that the cinematography would have to rely on natural light and shadow, since the film was set during the 1300s, when electricity did not exist, and when people mostly had to rely on oil lamps and sunshine in order to see their surroundings. Jean-Jacques Annaud says that Tonino Deli Colli had the genius ability to put the first light wherever Annaud wanted, but then Deli Colli had the tendency to put too much light up front. Deli Colli allegedly feared that there wouldn't be enough light for the film's future showings on television. But Annaud wasn't concerned about this, so Annaud secretly worked with the film's supervising gaffer, Romano Mancini, to change the lights so that Deli Colli wouldn't notice. To maintain a consistency of lighting styles for the film, the lights always had to be set up quickly, thus restricting the amount of camera movement for the film. But as complicated as it was getting Name of the Rose shot, the filming locations in Germany and Italy all shared one problem in common: poor sound quality. The sets were made of plywood, making distracting creaking noises whenever the actors walked around. And outside the sets, a horrible amount of noise came from various sources, including a nearby freeway and generators used to power the lights. Because of this, most of the sound recorded on set was useless, and Jean-Jacques Annaud states that 98% of the finished sound mix had to be looped through ADR, meaning that after production wrapped, many of the actors would have to come back during post-production and re-record their lines in recording studios. In an interview with Roger Ebert, Sean Connery stated, "God, it was one of the toughest films I've ever made. And of course, there was noise from planes and trains and buses and blimps. We couldn't record a single line of dialogue that was usable, and so we had to spend 10 days looping every line of the movie. The monastery was so cold you could see your breath when you spoke, and of course, they wanted that effect. But I wanted to make the film because I loved the book."
Talking about The Name of the Rose, seriously, it was an Italian writer, French director, German, Russian producer, a Scottish actor, and a German crew, an Italian crew. We shot in the Rheingau, and he's right, it was bloody cold, discomforting, but it was like, as I said, guerrilla warfare. You had to go in and shoot and get out before you froze.
In Germany, we didn't have that. But in Rome, everybody was talking about Name of the Rose. You know, they were taking tourists up in the air in a blimp.
In a blimp.
And we had to cut like whenever it appeared because we had the noise and everything.
But the sound was all useless, right? Didn't you all have to come back and re-record?
Yeah. You see, I'm used to it. That's how I worked in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
I actually didn't mind because it was an extra trip for me to Germany.
When I arrived there with my partner and my little boy and the entourage, you know, we arrived, there was a message saying, don't talk to Sean before you talk to me, because he's got ideas and I don't want to make changes. So I went down to the bar and there's Sean sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he immediately said, Andrew, and he said, couldn't we change this up? And I just stalled for time a little bit, but I did listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought a couple of the ideas were rather good. And when Jean-Jacques got back in the evening, and I said I couldn't help running into Sean because, you know, he was in the bar. Jean-Jacques said he wouldn't entertain the idea of changing anything. And I said, well, why not? If it's a good idea, why not, you know, why don't we change it?
Mm-hmm.
And he said because on some other picture that he'd made, he'd done that. He'd allowed the changes, and then later in the cutting rooms, he suddenly realizes why it was the way it was, and now it didn't make sense because of this change that they'd made on the spur of the moment.
That was an amazing experience because it was in an original abbey from the Benedictines, and it was such a powerful place. And when we actually shot the scene, we took the books out from the 14th century. You know, it was so real, everything. And for a young actor, it was quite an experience.
This one, I grant you, did not commit suicide.
It was freezing cold. And when I arrived at the open set, to my relief, I've seen two legs with this blood sticking out. And I thought, oh my God, thank you. I don't have to freeze my ass off. Jean-Jacques came to me very happily, you know, hilarious. And he said, Urs, do you see these legs? I said, yes. And I wanted to thank him that I don't actually had to be with my hat in the big pot, you know, when it was cold. And then he said to me, exactly like this, I want you to play the part. And I looked and he said, come on, you want to be realistic, you know, and I know you can play that much better. And I promise you, I film it very fast. And he kept his promise.
Was there actually blood in it that you had to submerge yourself in, or was it
cinema blood?
Oh, but you still had
cinema blood and ketchup. You know?
Oh gosh, but you still had to dunk your face and your head into it. Oh god.
Exactly.
How long did you have to hold your breath while you were under the blood?
Long. Afterwards, I was all day as a dead body, laying at the floor. It was freezing. And it was this beautiful scene with William Hickey.
The sea became blood, and behold, here is blood.
After 8 hours, we had technical problems, and we had to continue the next day. And on the end, because I was laying dead there, all the actors and Jean-Jacques gave me, the young actor, a standing ovation. That is an incredible memory I have of that hard day.
And as for onions, administered in small quantities, warm and moist, they help to prolong the male erection.
We forgot the heating lamps to bring in, and it was real cold. And then Jean-Jacques came up to me and said, Sean, it's perfect, exactly like this. But please, in your eyes, I feel a little bit pain that you have, you always see that body. And Jean exploded and said, listen, how dare you asking me something like this? The production forgot the heating. And I can't touch a body if an actor tries his best not to freeze and not to breathe, nothing. It's impossible for me. And he stopped the shooting. And believe me, I think it was the fastest time heating poles were brought to a set. And then he said to me, you know, no movie is worth to risk your health.
You find many circumstances in which you apply arsenic, Brother Severinus?
Yes, indeed. It is a most effective remedy for nervous disorders, if taken as a compound in small doses.
Hmm. And what of not so small doses?
Death?
And Sean was so generous, he said, listen, if it will help you, I'll read the lines with you. And he was absolutely extraordinary man.
Yeah.
The only thing was that it was easy to start a conversation with him, and he would, but you end up talking about golf.
Yeah.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
Watch out for the Draco who cometh in futurum to gnaw on your anima. La morte suprenos.
I still enjoyed scaring Christian Slater.
Yeah.
And Christian, if you're watching this, you know, you better well look over your shoulder, because you never know when I may just like, bah.
Ugly cum Salvatore, huh?
Mary Jo Slater remembers that when she visited the exterior Abbey sets near Rome, there were torrential rains and it was freezing cold. When Mary Jo stepped out of the bus wearing a mink coat which had been made for her by her mother, she walked into the mud outside and was suddenly greeted by a famous voice in Scottish, saying to her, "Hello, Mary, I'm Sean."
I am most curious to see the library for myself. May I do so?
No.
Why not?
It is a strict rule of the abbot that no one is permitted to enter the abbey library other than myself and my assistant.
Walker, yeah, yeah, wonderful man. Yeah, I went to see him in Munich. The play that he was in was so strange and weird. With people taking shit on the stage. Something to do with farmers.
He has such a unique face.
A unique face and one of the nicest. I mean, everybody.
Michael Habeck, I met on the set, and with him I became friends afterwards until he died. So whenever I was in Munich working, I met him, and I did some coaching also with him for the German, because we Swiss people, we have a slight accent. A funny and a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man.
One day we are shooting, that was in February in Rome. In exterior, it was snowing, very, very cold. And we have to shoot a scene where Salvatore was on the little tower and putting down a stone.
Library?
And Sean Connery said to the first assistant director, "No, I don't come. It's ridiculous. You have the double to do that, because nobody see my face." Franco Coduti go to see Sean and say to Sean, "You know, Jean-Jacques need nowhere." Thomas Schühly was not on the set. Jean-Jacques Annaud say, "You have to say he has to come. He's paid." I go to Sean and I go in the caravan. "Hi, Sean, how do you do? What do you do?" And we start to speak during quite 30 minutes about everything. He asked me to drink a whiskey. I don't drink whiskey, but I take a whiskey with him. And each one say, he come to ask me to shoot, and I don't say anything. Okay, I have to turn back to on set. I go at just a moment taking the door. I make exactly as Colombo. I turn back and say, "Oh, Sean, I'm sorry, but you know, we were shooting this scene with Salvatore, and the camera come down with the stone and see probably your face. Probably it's a pity if you're not in a." Say, oh, Gerald, I will do that for you, no problem. But you know, I will be sick after doing 3 weeks because it's too cold. let me know, what do you think to shoot during 3 weeks without me? So I laugh, we laugh together, and I go to Jean-Jacques, you have to shoot with double. Don't, it's very professional, don't insist.
Stop! Enough! He tried to kill us!
7 times I did not spit in his face. After the 7th time, Sean said to me, you know, Ron, we're going to have to keep doing this until you fucking spit in my face. So please get it fucking right the next time, because I don't want to go again. And so I was terrified, but I knew that if I prolonged it any further, he was going to hate me worse than actually having my own spit on his face.
Yeah.
So ultimately on the 8th take, I actually did, and that's the one they printed.
Who was she? Who was this creature that rose like the dawn, was bewitching as the moon, radiant as the sun, terrible as an army poised for battle?
The sex scene between Adzo and the girl was made possible when Jean-Jacques Annaud gave Valentina Vargas free rein over how she would guide the teenage Christian Slater through the scene.
I said to Christian, this is Valentina's scene, and I'm not going to tell you what she's going to do. And she was good with that, because I choreographed the scene before, I explained to her what I wanted, I explained the action, what she was doing, make sure that she will not tell him what was going to happen. He said, please tell me what's going to happen. And you know what? There was a priest. I had my consultant was Padre Arpa. He was Fellini's consultant on religious matter, and he was always on my set. And those 2 actors, they were so frightened with the scene that they went to Padre Arpa and asked for benediction. And Christian said, but is it okay to do that? He said, well, you know, the message of God is a message of love. So it's about love. Go ahead, love is beautiful.
When William of Baskerville learns what Adzo has done, the ensuing conversation would require Sean Connery to convey for audiences the chaste side of William. He's a man who has only ever been in love with the books and the authors that he's read. William has never been intimate with women the way Adzo has. So when Adzo confesses his sin, at first, William is unsure how to react.
Oh dear.
Why, oh dear?
You are in love.
Is that bad?
For a monk, it does present certain problems.
But doesn't St. Thomas Aquinas praise love above all other virtues?
Yes. The love of God, Adzo. The love of God.
Oh. And the love of woman?
Of woman? Thomas Aquinas knew precious little.
But as the scene progresses, William is able to harness the wisdom which he's undoubtedly gotten from the books he loves to help Adzo navigate through his moral dilemma. I think Sean Connery is terrific in this scene. He's completely convincing as a mentor to a younger individual who's seeking his advice. The role of the mentor will turn out to be well suited for Connery during these later years of his career. In a scene like this, I no longer feel as though I'm looking at Sean Connery, ladies' man. I feel like I'm looking at William of Baskerville, as Umberto Eco wrote him. That's what acting is all about.
Of course, I don't have the benefit of your experience. But I find it difficult to convince myself that God would have introduced such a foul being into creation without endowing her with some virtues. How peaceful life would be without love, Adzo. How safe, how tranquil, and how dull.
I was so touched by the emotion that came from the reading by Sean and by Christian. I couldn't say cut. My throat was so tight and my heart was so full that I had to move in front of the camera and do this. Cut.
And to your fellow Franciscan dedicates.
Hey, you, quiet down. Hey, go. You get in line like the others. Hey, go. Hey, you.
Salvatore, let him go.
This is Cuthbert of Winchester, one of our most esteemed Franciscan guests.
What do you think makes Jean-Jacques decide to give you a role as a Franciscan monk in the film?
Because they wouldn't let me into a restaurant in Rome because I wasn't wearing a tie or I looked too shabby or my hair was too all over the place. But I said I didn't want to do it.
But what if Ubertino is right and you are wrong?
And I said I particularly do not want to have a tonsure, one of those things. So here they agreed. I was the only person who didn't have to have it because even Sean had a tonsure.
That's right.
I was doing some scene and I read, and I said, who wrote this crap? And he said, you did. And I said, oh, really? All right. I said, I think we could change it and make it a bit better. And Jean-Jacques said, absolutely not. No, you can't change a word because otherwise Sean will want to change.
Was it not your vanity, your stubborn intellectual pride that brought you into conflict with Bernardo before?
Gabriella Pescucci remembers, I really enjoyed dressing all the cardinals. It was challenging to make all their elaborate costumes. They were completely hand-embroidered. Sean Connery, a generous and charming man, of course was a pleasure to dress him, even with a simple Franciscan tunic. Of course, the tunic was completely hand-stitched.
What about Michael Lonsdale? He's one of my favorites.
Yeah. And mine too, and unfortunately we lost him.
Yeah, I wanted to interview him, but I couldn't get a hold of his reps.
I went to Paris a year later and we met, took me to a place where I had probably the best oysters in my life.
Yeah.
Then we went to his apartment, which was in Invalid Plaza.
Wow.
It was a great apartment, but it was great because everything inside was so lived in,
Yeah.
Some torn pieces of sofa, but it was a good quality sofa.
So now that I shot in a catacomb, but believe it or not, I wanted to use the big catacombs that are owned by the Vatican. But when they heard that it was for The Name of the Rose, they said, no way, this is a blasphemous piece of literature. There's no way. And we were forbidden to shoot in any possession of the church.
Nancy, do you realize we're in one of the greatest libraries in all of Christendom?
Now, that set was so big that we had to build the soundstage around because it was a vertical set. We only built 3 and we changed the configuration of the books, but it was a nightmare for continuity to remember where the books were. That set is possibly still standing in Rome because they show it to people. So we destroyed the outside, but the inside, all this library and this labyrinth has been kept.
It is I. Raise your lantern.
The only day that you saw the Hunchback naked was my very first day of filming. It was the only day they had to apply the Hunchback and create the makeup on me for the first time because they'd never done it before.
Yes, so that the holes coincide with my holes. Si, domine bellissimi, si, eritinite petarini.
I was literally in the makeup chair for 12 and a half hours, which only left 1 hour of shooting time. And we had to get this scene where F. Murray Abraham is about to torture me. We accomplished 2 things that day. We got rid of the exercise of having to apply this prosthetic, human-looking hump and replace it with something that was part of the costume for all the rest of the days I worked. And we also got a chance to, in real time, figure out how to apply the face makeup to this guy and create his ultimate look, which we ended up getting down to about 3.5, 4 hours a day.
This is one of the most intense sequences in the film. For one thing, Ron Perlman gives an amazing performance. His screams of terror sound real, vividly capturing that sense of dread which anyone might imagine feeling upon an impending torture through burning. Then, with remarkable ease, Perlman's performance veers from extreme fear to good-natured humor, when Salvatore attempts to use his mentally challenged state as an excuse for his lack of information.
Stupido, me no know nothing.
The sequence is also notable for F. Murray Abraham's performance. Although some of the film's cast and crew members did not have a pleasant experience working with him, there can be no denying that Abraham exhibits a ferocious on-screen presence in The Name of the Rose, from the sinister evil in his eyes to the gentle tone in his voice when he tries to coax a confession out of Salvatore with deceptive warmth and false assurances.
Open the gates of your heart. Search the depths of your soul. Search.
I search, Signor Bellissimo. I search.
F. Murray Abraham is one of the finest actors ever to have graced the screens of movies, and he turns Bernardo Gui into one of cinema's deadliest villains.
Your death scene when Volker kills you, you said it was just cherry juice, it was pretty easy to do.
Yeah, I don't think it was cherry, I think it was cranberry.
Cranberry.
This entire mystery hinges on the theft and possession of a book written in Greek and hidden in some secret part of the library.
Then I thought, okay, now comes the big actor on James Bond. You know? And Mary came.
The shepherd has done his duty, and the infected sheep must now be consigned to the purifying flames.
You may burn Brother Remigio, but you will not put a stop to the crimes being committed in this abbey.
Murray lost for a moment the text. He was so powerful, only his eyes. And then he screamed, keep the fucking cameras rolling. And then he was brilliant. Yeah. And afterwards, I shared this with Jean-Jacques. And he smiled and he said to me, yeah, you know, Sean is like a Rolls Royce. If you steer him, he reacts on everything.
Yeah.
And on that moment, I realized what a great actor it is.
Other monks will meet their deaths here, and they also will have blackened fingers and blackened tongues.
Annaud states that on F. Murray Abraham's last scheduled day of filming, around 8:30 in the morning, Abraham was nowhere to be found, was off somewhere shopping, and had no intention of coming sooner. While the crew waited for Abraham to arrive, Annaud and Bernd Eichinger devised a plan. When Abraham finally showed up, he apologized for being late. Annaud and Eichinger were accompanied by their lawyer, and they told the actor that they'd shoot his last day whenever they wanted, and that Abraham would pay the expenses. Abraham allegedly replied, "Touché."
Do you, Salvatore, renounce the devil and embrace Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?
I can't remember whose idea it was to have me singing a lullaby. I'd like to say that was Jean-Jacques' idea. We had a beautiful, kind of a linguistic person you informs you about medieval music, literature, etc. And he came up with this lullaby that existed back in the 14th century, I guess, and got a copy of it for me and played it for me. And I played it for Jean-Jacques, and Jean-Jacques said, "That's the one. That's what you'll be singing. Can you learn that?" You know, it's kind of a camera trick. It's a kind of a perspective trick where the fire is literally around 8 feet in front of you, but it looks like it's on you the way they set the camera. So I could feel the heat of the flames. Yeah. So that informed my acting through that moment quite vividly.
During the filming of the stake-burning climax, Helmut Qualtinger was in bad health.
It's better to die fast than to spend the rest of your life in a prison. The devil I renounce is you, Bernardo Gui.
And then unfortunately, shortly after the movie, he died.
Yeah, I think he died before it came out.
Exactly.
During filming of the fiery climax, the conditions were so dangerous that some of the actors almost got physically harmed.
I do a rehearsal, and then I shoot. We put the flames on the roof, and then I send my actor, Mr. Chaliapin, and at the moment he gets into the room, the ceiling on fire falls on him, and the timber falls on his head. And he collapses. So my wife jumps and says, "Oh, Monsieur Chaliapin. And he said in his perfect French, he said, "Is the take good? Is the take good?" I said, "Mr. Chaliapin, this is not the problem. Are you all right?" He said, "I am 81. It's no problem if I die. What's important is the take good. The outside and the inside, I had 7 cameras. And for the inside shot, my Italian crew was so frightened to go inside the tower to start the camera that they told me that they had started the camera. Therefore, I started the fire and the camera went out rolling. And I had to deal only with 2 cameras versus the 7, because no one would go inside because it was full of, gas and oil and benzene and all that kind of stuff. I realized that one was not going because I couldn't hear it. So I had 3 versus 7. I was quite furious because they wouldn't tell me, of course. They said, the camera jammed. No, they never started it.
We had to burn the library, which was a tower in the shape of Castel del Monte, which had been built on location in Fiano Romano, which is right north of Rome. And when they burnt it, they started the fire with the director still in it. So we almost lost the director.
One of that glue dropped on Sean Connery's cowl, and as he moved close to the fire, he caught fire. And I jumped on him and rolled on the ground with him and stopped the fire.
In terms of the ending, the battle I had a little bit with Eichinger was I felt that when the whole place is on fire and Sean is trying to save the books, but that there should be a moment when he has to choose between saving the books or saving the boy, and that he saves the boy, but maybe a buy one, get one free, and grabs a book at the same time. And Eichinger wouldn't have, he said he was always very worried about audiences thinking that he was some sort of paedophile monk. I said, who cares if that's what some people read into it? Good luck to them.
Yeah.
You might read that into the book, or you might not. It's up to you. That's the ambiguity. But Eichinger was very, very adamant that no.
Katja Eichinger states that the main reason why Bernd Eichinger was sensitive about the pedophilia issue was because Eichinger himself had had bad experiences growing up in a Catholic boarding school run by priests, and while he didn't suffer any abuse himself, he was aware of the Catholic Church's habit of concealing pedophilia. Therefore, it was very important to Eichinger that audiences not come away thinking that William of Baskerville might be a sexual predator.
That was the last day of my of the shooting, I remember. The very, very last day. And that was the very last shot I did. A lot of artificial snow, but also, incredibly enough, a lot of real snow. It never snows in Rome. Never, ever. But the day I was supposed to do that scene here, it was real snow. It snowed in Rome so much that I ended up being alone on the set. The people in Rome, they're not used to snow, and they decided that they couldn't come. And what you see here is not artificial, it's absolutely real snow. And I could not believe that God had sent me the snow when I needed it.
Connery said, this is what it says on the timetable, and that's how much time I give you. After that, I'm going to go to the golf course. That's why in the last shot, it's a stand-in, you can only see his back.
At the end of the film, I did something a bit silly that is not done among professionals, but I got the prop people to build me a clapperboard, and I had it signed by everyone on the set.
To edit The Name of the Rose, Bernd Eichinger brought in Janne Seitz, with whom he had previously worked on Christiane F. and The Never-Ending Story.
She was Bernd's lover, apparently incredibly seductive, very beautiful, and very wild.
By this point, Eichinger had sold his office building in Munich in order to keep funding the production, which meant that he would have to live in the basement until the movie was released.
Now I go in the basement, and there is Bernie is like this. JJ. I said, what's happening? He said, I didn't want to bother you when we shot, but I had to sell the building to make the movie.
When I saw the rough cut, because he got me over to look at the rough assembly, also they needed some voiceover, they needed some narration.
Yeah.
Which we hadn't used in the script.
Oh,
because
really?
on the whole, you try not to use narration. At any rate, Jean-Jacques didn't want to use narration. I didn't mind the idea, but anyway, I came up with the idea that this is Adzo in his old age, remembering the time when he was with William of Baskerville and doing it like that.
I have never regretted my decision, for I learned from my master much that was wise and good and true.
So whenever we needed to get something across that was not evident in the cut, we resorted to voiceover.
The last bit of the voiceover was written by Bernd, actually. He would quote it and it would always make him cry. He was just such a big softie.
And yet, now that I am an old man, I must confess that of all the faces that appear to me out of the past, the one I see most clearly is that of the girl, of whom I have never ceased to dream these many long years. She was the only earthly love of my life. Yet I never knew, nor ever learned, her name.
Scoring the music for The Name of the Rose would be 33-year-old composer James Horner, whose previous credits had included composing the musical scores for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and Cocoon. In an interview with Jean-Baptiste Martin, Annaud recalled that a few weeks before the release of The Name of the Rose in Germany and the United States, the film still had no music. Annaud sent the script to the Gorfaine Schwartz agency that had managed several of his previous composers, but none came forward.
That was Bernd Eichinger's suggestion to go with a young composer by the name of James Horner.
Annaud traveled to Los Angeles and met James Horner, with whom he discussed at length on how to give voice to the film. 1986 was already proving to be a busy year for Horner, who had just finished recording 2 symphonic scores with the London Symphony Orchestra. On An American Tail, Horner had had a pleasant experience working with 3 cinematic titans, Steven Spielberg, Don Bluth, and Gary Goldman. On Aliens, it was a different story. Horner had clashed with James Cameron and Gale Anna Hurd, recalling in an interview with Charles de Lauzirika that Cameron and Hurd had expected Horner to deliver a score for them in an agonizingly short amount of time. Even though their film hadn't yet been picture-locked, Horner would ultimately leave post-production on Aliens before his score had even been finished. On The Name of the Rose, Horner's work for Jean-Jacques Annaud and Bernd Eichinger would become fraught with its own tension. At first, the problem was creative differences. Horner wanted electronic music for Name of the Rose. Annaud wanted a more classical orchestral score. Due to time constraints, Annaud couldn't convince Horner to give the film an orchestral score, so Horner won that argument, and the filmmakers set out on their synthesized experiment. More problems arose when it became clear that Horner and Annaud didn't work in the same way. In an interview with Jean-Christophe Arlon, Annaud recalled, "For the first time in the history of film music, we brought 2 trucks loaded with material all the way from Australia. We went looking for stuff in the museums of medieval instruments, and we recorded the sounds of lots of different period instruments. You have to realize that this process took 5 hours. I was there and they told me, would you prefer this note or this note? And then 2 days later, I was invited to listen to the piece and was asked, so do you like it? And I went, no. What do you mean? You gave this material the go-ahead the other day and now you say you don't like them? I replied, well, no, when it's all up there together, I no longer like it. Finally, I could not go on because we worked until 4 in the morning in the middle of the forest in Bavaria in some studio. My producer came in and said, James does the music, he sends it to Jean-Jacques, and Jean-Jacques decides to use it or not. In an interview with David Hockett, James Horner blamed Bernd Eichinger for the communication problems on Name of the Rose, stating, "The producer on The Name of the Rose was somebody that I didn't care for. My relationship was supposed to be with Jean-Jacques. I wanted it to be a little more medieval, and Jean-Jacques likes things a little more traditional. The producer wanted it all to be just traditional violins." In the end, Jean-Jacques Annaud kept some of Horner's cues and threw out some of the others. Horner recorded the score in Munich, and when he finished his work, he left without saying goodbye. Annaud admits, "I loved his music for my film, but I disliked the man." To quote Jean-Baptiste Martin, the end product mixes together music instrumentation, both ancient and modern, with a side of synthesizers and other instruments reminiscent of the Middle Ages: chimes, bells, a flute, a zither, a harp. The music gives the film an atmosphere that informs the film, depending on the scene, to be melancholic, haunting, and terrifying.
Just before checking the answer print, I was already in my car. I got a call that Umberto Eco had flown to Munich to see the answer print. So the writer, the author, was going to see the movie for the first time with me. So I said, no, I can't do that. So it broke my heart, to tell you the truth. But here it was in the lab, so I decided not to go. Instead, I went back to my apartment, looked at my watch, said, okay, they'll call me around 9 o'clock. Now it's 9:30, and there is no call. So there was a bottle of wine, I open it, sip a glass. Now it's 9:45, and I have another glass. And now, because I'm in München, it's a very religious city, you know, it goes bang-wing, bong-boing, bong-boing. It's the bells. It's Sunday morning. And I'm sleeping on the carpet. And oh my God, they didn't call, they hate the movie. Now Umberto, my good friend Umberto, didn't like it. It's terrible. Now the telephone rings. And this is Bernd Eichinger. He says, where were you? We called you all night. Well, I was so drunk I couldn't hear the telephone. So he says, come quickly. And here I come to meet Umberto Eco. He's in the lobby, and he shows his dark back. He turns to me, and he has a full smile. And he said, you know, what I feared the most, I love the most. Sean Connery is fantastic!
How do you market a film like The Name of the Rose? How do you make it look exciting for American audiences? There was a poster made up for the movie which Jean-Jacques Annaud says he hated. Annaud hated the theatrical trailer as well. I agree with Annaud about the poster, but I actually do like the theatrical trailer, and there's a personal reason for it. I'll explain later in the video. Curiously, although the 20th Century Fox logo does play before the trailer, the Fox logo does not play on any of the prints of the movie that I have seen on VHS and DVD.
But do you know why the Fox logo doesn't actually appear before the film itself?
I wouldn't have a clue, and I'm very surprised that's the case.
The Name of the Rose was released to theaters in the United States in September 1986.
And when I've seen the film, it was in New York. We had a pre-screening, and Christian Slater was there, and all the New York actors. And I just thought it was brilliant.
The first reviews were bad.
The movie itself is a disappointment. All murder mysteries should have plots that are crystal clear so that we can follow the investigation along with the investigators. This one is so confused, Connery doesn't solve the murders, he simply stumbles over the solution. We keep waiting for everything to be explained, but the movie's ending is so confused that I didn't even understand why Connery was still alive.
Let me get into the editing room, take out all these wild characters that are flying around.
Would have benefited from a great deal more simplicity. There are too many people on the screen. They are weird oddballs. They dress and look and behave and speak weirdly. We can hardly see them in the shadows of the photography. They're walking in and out of all those mazes in such a way that eventually The film is just exhausting to look at.
This is a 2-hour movie which takes about 1 hour and 57 minutes to get into. It's all set up. The movie takes forever to get going. You don't care who the killer is. You don't care about the victims. That's the way I felt.
But you have to put the plot aside. What is so fascinating
you have to
about
do what?
You have to put the plot aside.
Michael, it looks like a skit from Saturday Night Live with everybody running around with hoods. I thought the movie was a crushing bore. I couldn't have cared anything about what goes on in an abbey in the Middle Ages.
I
It's for a
can't
real,
imagine that such a
real select
likable
audience.
person as you could be so wrong about a movie.
Torture in a movie, too. Just your cup of tea, right, Michael? What a pleasant experience.
In the United States, the film did poorly. Box Office Mojo reports that the domestic intake was only $7 million.
I do know that it was a disappointment because it did not generate a lot of popular mainstream viewing. And I think that was a great disappointment for all the people involved, but probably for Jean-Jacques the most, because he was really obsessed with showing the world, celebrating the genius of Umberto Eco.
At first, it looked like The Name of the Rose was doomed for commercial failure, and Jean-Jacques Annaud feared that his career as a director was over.
A lot of people around me were convinced that the movie was not going to work because I went so extreme with the faces, and the subject matter was quite obscure. And I must say, when it opened, you know, I just had decided that, okay, movies were not for me because the reviews were appalling and the public didn't go. So, in America. Very fortunately, after that, it was such a triumph in so many countries that people have even difficulty to believe today that I got such bad reviews.
Overseas, in Europe, The Name of the Rose did box office wonders. After 2 weeks of business, the way was paved for Jean-Jacques Annaud to move on to the production of his next film, The Bear. As for what the cast and crew thought of the film,
I thought it was okay. It's very difficult to be objective about things, especially if you write them, but you don't direct them. I thought that he did a very good job, Jean-Jacques, and I thought Sean was very good.
It's funny you should say it did well in Europe because it did really well. And at that time, my first wife was French, so they all thought that I was like George Lucas, that I must be rolling it because this movie had been so successful. And here it barely, made a ripple. I love Sean Connery. I love the feeling. I love the scenes where he's very moved by the manuscripts and hard to do because that was post, Life of Brian and The Holy Grail, where a lot of those things had relatively recently been lampooned. So it was hard to reclaim them for a serious movie. I liked it very much.
I had been taken on a dream journey being on the set, and it was also impressive. And so when I saw the film, in some points I thought, oh, but this could have been even better, but I thought it was great.
Umberto Eco's opinion of the film appears to have been mixed. Whenever people asked if he liked the film or not, Eco's answer seemed to change depending on whoever was asking him.
They say that The Name of the Rose made more or less 50 million copies.
It did.
If it would have been easier, they would have been 30 millions. But I am satisfied like that.
Yeah, but you didn't like the movie, though.
No, that's another problem, the movie.
He did want to stay detached from the film, so he did comment publicly on it very little and only if really pressed. And so there are bits and pieces here and there. But basically, he enjoyed the film and thought it was a success in artistic terms. And how it impacted, well, he was already so tired of the success of the book that the additional success that came through the film was not exactly welcome, but that was certainly not the film's fault.
Jean-Jacques Annaud reveals that Umberto Eco got unhappy whenever Name of the Rose fans raved to the author about certain scenes that weren't even in his book. Eco resented that the girl had so much importance in the movie, which probably is an indication that he didn't appreciate how the girl survives at the end of the movie, whereas she's sent off to a grisly fate in his book.
Is it true that Stanley Kubrick wanted to adapt Foucault's Pendulum into a film?
Yes, apparently so. Because it was and is a film about conspiracy theories and lies and deception, and it would have worked very well. He was interested, My dad and his publisher resisted this a little bit, and then Kubrick died. Too bad.
The film version of The Name of the Rose began getting nominated for awards all over Europe. In 1987, the film won 3 Italian National Syndicate Awards, 4 David di Donatello Awards, the René Clair Award for Jean-Jacques Annaud, the Bavarian Film Award for Best Production, and a Caesar Award for Best Foreign Language Film.
Bernd received the German Film Awards. You have to remember, Bernd founded the German Film Academy, and you have 3 German Film Awards for Best Movie: gold, silver, and bronze. So he says, give me this award, and there's so much light, I can't see that it's only silver. They didn't give me fucking gold. And he said, if I had realized on stage there was only silver, I would have just threw the fucking thing on the floor. Who the fuck gives me a silver for name of a fucking rose?
Yeah.
And some totally random, ridiculous movie that nobody knows got gold. But that's Germany for you.
The following year, in March 1988, the film won 2 BAFTA awards, Best Makeup Artist, Hasso von Hugo, and Best Actor for Sean Connery.
And the winner is Sean Connery for Name of the Rose.
Less than a month after Connery won the BAFTA for Name of the Rose, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences awarded him the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his performance as Malone in Brian De Palma's The Untouchables.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. That's how you get Capone.
And the winner is Sean Connery in The Untouchables.
Having experienced a commercial dry spell during the first half of the 1980s, the success of The Name of the Rose and The Untouchables had invigorated the middle-aged actor's career. Sean Connery was back.
Indiana. Indiana. Let it go.
The success of The Name of the Rose enabled Bernd Eichinger to produce whatever he wanted for the next few years, but in 1989 he plummeted with Last Exit to Brooklyn, a box office disaster. That same year, Janne Seitz committed suicide. In the 1990s, Bernd Eichinger teamed up again with Andrew Birkin on Salt on Our Skin and The Cement Garden.
I directed 2 pictures for him. And he gave me the money to make, which nobody else was going to do, to make a film called The Cement Garden. And he gave it to me. I had carte blanche. I could do what I liked, providing I didn't go over budget, which is very rare to get that kind. And he hadn't even read the script. You can't ask for more than that. That's fantastic.
Eichinger's relationship with Janne Seitz was later given a fictional portrayal in the film Rossini. In the 1990s, Bernd Eichinger focused less on big international productions and more on local films, especially comedies, which brought him the most success during this period. He also did some directing. For Jean-Jacques Annaud, the 1990s brought international success with the films The Lover and 7 Years in Tibet. James Horner would eventually reconcile with Jean-Jacques Annaud in the late 1990s, by which point Annaud was entering pre-production on the film Enemy at the Gates. A television studio technician had called Annaud and said, "My brother James Horner says hello." Annaud was moved by this first step initiated by Horner. Later, Horner's agent informed Annaud that Horner had read the screenplay for Enemy at the Gates and wanted to meet him. 15 years after The Name of the Rose, Annaud and Horner had made their peace. Annaud stated, "Emotionally, he became one of my closest friends, and Enemy at the Gates marked the beginning of a new era between him and me. From the conflict is born a confidence that I had with few people in the business."
It's a dream of a lifetime to be understood by a composer this way.
There's this sort of soul that it has, and this kind of quiet sadness
that I thought was very important to bring out. It's that sort of intimacy that Jean-Jacques and I tried to do as much as we could.
I first discovered The Name of the Rose as a grade school child sometime around the year 2000. At the age of 9, I had watched the movie Entrapment on VHS, and I had loved Sean Connery's performance in that movie. Ironically, at the time that I watched Entrapment, I didn't even know that Connery had been the first James Bond in movie history, nor did I recognize him from my early childhood viewing of Darby O'Gill and The Little People. All I saw in Entrapment was an unfamiliar man in his late 60s who was unbelievably cool, had an awesome beard, and a ferocious on-screen presence. Even though there was like a 40-year age difference between Connery and Catherine Zeta-Jones, their chemistry was sweet and believable. Connery's performance in Entrapment demonstrated, to 9-year-old me anyway, how a man can age into his 60s and still be in command of his craft, can still be appealing to women, can still be capable of goodness. At the age of 9, I instantly turned into a big Sean Connery fan. When Gus Van Sant's Finding Forrester was released, my grandpa Chuck and I went to see it in theaters. I was instantly struck by the contrast between Connery as the aging legendary writer and F. Murray Abraham in the villainous role of the wannabe writer. Sometime after that, my mother took my sister and I to the video store, and she rented the VHS tape of Jim Henson's Labyrinth for us. Labyrinth was released to VHS by Embassy Home Entertainment, and Embassy made the strange decision to put the theatrical trailer for the very R-rated Name of the Rose on the tape before the feature presentation. Grade school me immediately became curious to see this crazy-looking monk movie which Sean Connery and F. Murray Abraham had made together in the 80s. Watching the trailer today, I really only have 2 criticisms of it. One is that there are no clips of Ron Perlman in it. What's up with that? And 2, the trailer provides no indication that there's a hot chick in the movie somewhere, which I certainly believe would have boosted the interest of audiences who otherwise might have been too unimpressed by the trailer to see the movie when it first came out. When I mentioned to Jean-Jacques Annaud that I had first become aware of The Name of the Rose after seeing the trailer for it on the Labyrinth VHS, Annaud was amused and revealed to me that he had gotten to meet Jim Henson during the 1983 Avoriaz Fantastic Film Festival.
You go that way.
Lock them up!
One final murder has been planned.
Master! Master? How do we get out?
With some difficulty. And it's his. Sean Connery. F. Murray Abraham. The Name of the Rose. A story of unholy murder.
One day, young teenage me caught most of the first half of The Name of the Rose on pay-per-view. I even watched the sex scene, but I quickly turned the movie off before my family came home. Later, when I was in 8th grade, I casually walked into a Best Buy, purchased the DVD, took it home, watched the whole movie in its entirety, and I became a huge fan. I had never seen anything like it. The Name of the Rose meant a lot to Sean Connery. Jean-Jacques Annaud states that Connery loved the film and that they kept in touch. Connery had for a long time wanted to make a movie entitled Smoke and Mirrors, a biopic about the magician Robert Houdin, and he had approached Annaud about directing it, but according to Annaud, the script kept declining. The film was never made. The last film that Connery starred in was 2003's The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The production was a disaster. Among other things, the World Entertainment News Network alleged that things got so bad between Connery and director Stephen Norrington that Norrington even taunted Connery to punch him in the face. Connery declined. The film was a big disappointment, and it made Connery think seriously about retiring. In 2004, Jean-Jacques Annaud directed Two Brothers, returning him to the genre of the animal picture. It was a modest success with family audiences. That same year, Bernd Eichinger finally got his big artistic and commercial comeback with Downfall, which he both produced and wrote the screenplay for. Downfall was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film and inspired various internet parodies which delighted Eichinger. In December 2005, Jean-Jacques Annaud presented Sean Connery with the EFA's Lifetime Achievement Award, allowing Connery to remind his audience just how important The Name of the Rose had been for him.
I'm going to tell you something that not many people know. Oh, he's still here. About Jean-Jacques. When we were going to make the movie, he had this marvelous black curly mane of hair. And when we finished the movie, this is the result. And The Name of the Rose took $2 million for the entire United States, which was
a disaster.
A disaster. But we were not really that concerned, because I think everybody who was involved with it was convinced that it was something really special, and it has proven to be, to this day, even in America. We opened the film after America, about 4 weeks later, and in Germany, Italy, France, Spain, and the UK, I think, within weeks, we took $60 million.
Then, the following summer, in June 2006, Connery received the American Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award. By then, he had officially retired from acting in movies.
A few months ago, I was in London. I was having a great lunch with my very first agent. He's older than me. Suddenly he said to me, "Sean, life is good. But isn't the third act shit?" I suppose he has a point, but not tonight.
Later that year, Bernd Eichinger and Andrew Birkin brought their adaptation of Perfume, the Story of a Murderer, to the screen. Much like The Name of the Rose, it didn't do much business in the United States, but it was a smash hit in Europe. In 2008, Bernd Eichinger produced and co-wrote The Baader-Meinhof Complex, netting him yet another Academy Award nomination for Best Foreign Language Film. In 2011, Bernd Eichinger was eating dinner with family and friends at his home in Los Angeles when he had a heart attack and died. He was 61.
At his funeral in LA, Stan Lee made a speech. I asked Stan Lee, if Bernd was a Marvel hero, what would his name be? And he said, he'd be Do It Man, Bernie the Do It Man. And I asked him, so what would his Achilles heel be? Like all Marvel heroes have to have a weakness. He said, he'd be too trusting of people. And his superpower is to influence people. I think a lot of the things he did was like, in terms of movie making, was very brave, and he took like huge risks many times in his life. He knew fear very well. So I created an award in his name, like for new filmmakers. It's part of a German Film Awards, and it's called the No Fear Awards.
Jean-Jacques Annaud and James Horner would go on to work together on 2 more films, 2011's Day of the Falcon and 2015's Wolf Totem. In June 2015, James Horner was killed in a plane crash while flying his single-engine aircraft over Southern California. He was 61 years old. Autopsy reports determined that Horner's system had been loaded with headache medicine at the time of the death, and the crash was officially ruled an accident. But Jean-Jacques Annaud reveals that one of Horner's last letters to him reads now like a goodbye letter. That same summer, I had recently graduated from David Lynch's film school, and my master's thesis film, The Parasite, had entered post-production. When it came time to do the music, I instructed my composer, Ford Fanter, to listen to James Horner's soundtrack for The Name of the Rose. Musically, The Name of the Rose has always made a tremendous impression on me, demonstrating that music in thrillers could be understated in conveying romanticism and eeriness. The Name of the Rose also greatly influenced my Puritan horror screenplay, Graves and Goblins, which I fully intend to make into a feature film someday. Near the end of his life, Umberto Eco expressed interest in having The Name of the Rose adapted into a television miniseries, in the hopes that a miniseries might give the characters more time for the clerical quarrels that he had coveted so much in the book. Eco even approached Jean-Jacques Annaud about directing this miniseries, but Annaud refused to be involved in it, responding, "How can I do it again without the set that I destroyed?" Umberto Eco died of pancreatic cancer in February 2016. Jean-Jacques Annaud attended Eco's funeral, and there he was given Eco's hat. The miniseries of The Name of the Rose eventually reached television screens in 2019. Directed by Giacomo Battiato, the miniseries starred John Turturro as William of Baskerville. Turturro stated in interviews that he had never seen the initial movie. I believe that the initial movie, which we got in 1986, is built to last. Of course, The Name of the Rose also changed the lives of its cast and crew.
Some years ago, I wrote my biography. In Switzerland, it was a bestseller. Still today, whenever I give an interview or I have book readings or stuff like that, people always come back and ask questions about The Name of the Rose.
And that was kind of a step that I always dreamed about, so I'm not just typecasted. I love the movie. It's one of a kind.
It was a good film that was one of the first big productions in Italy after a long time. When they put it on television, it was the highest rated film that ever came on Italian television. It's part of the common cultural heritage of this generation.
It's one of the movies you're, as a studio executive, when it's all over, you're glad that you said yes. We're excited about the casting, and Ron Perlman was great. Sean was great, and it was a terrific film.
It's one of the few films of mine that I admire without qualification. I mean, there's always something about a film that I'm in that, I have a problem with, usually. There's only 2 or 3 projects I've ever worked on that I thought, okay, I wouldn't change a thing. And Name of the Rose is one of those. A great eye recognizes how great Name of the Rose was, and there aren't that many around. It takes a very sophisticated kind of a moviegoer. And that's what has borne out over the decades since, the 36 years we just identified since its release, is that there's a very small fraction of moviegoers who got Name of the Rose in the manner in which it was intended. But those people are precious to me, and always will have a very special place in my heart.
Ron, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I mean, just to get you and JJ already gives me so much confidence this is going to be a damn good video. So.
Well, it's my pleasure, and good luck with it, and thank you for being a fan of something that is very special in my heart and my memory. Take care, again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Whatever the fuck your name is.
Sean Connery died in the Bahamas on October 31st, 2020, at the age of 90. In an interview with the Daily Mail, Connery's wife, Micheline, stated, "It was no life for him. He was not able to express himself laterally. At least he died in his sleep, and he was just so peaceful. I was with him all the time, and he just slipped away. It was what he wanted. He had dementia, and it took its toll on him. He got his final wish to slip away without any fuss." At the end of Umberto Eco's novel of The Name of the Rose, we are told by Adso that after he and William of Baskerville parted company, William is said to have died during the plague. The end of the movie is slightly different. Adso tells us that he doesn't know what happened to William. It's as if William simply faded away. Sean Connery was my favorite movie star. I hate that he's not around anymore. I hate that there will never be another movie with him in it. And yet, there's definitely a sense of comfort that I feel whenever I revisit Connery's best films. To see Connery on screen, where his memory will never fade away, is oftentimes like returning to the counsel of a wise grandfather who has so much to teach the younger generations, but sometimes has to transcend his own limitations in order to get it done. The Name of the Rose gave Connery the opportunity to do all of that and more. By defying everyone who said he was wrong for the part of William of Baskerville, Connery got to show loving audiences all around the world what he was fully capable of as an actor, playing a man who was reasonable and intelligent in some areas, reserved and flawed in other areas, but finally, enough of a sensitive human being to brave whatever obstacles in his path, from the darkest of catacombs to the most hellish of fires, in order to save the day. It was, I believe, his finest performance. It is cold in the scriptorium. My thumb aches. I leave this video essay. I do not know for whom. I no longer know what it is about. Stat rosa pristina nomine, nomina nuda tenemos. Thanks for watching.